Welcome back to another sci-fi episode where psychology and finances intersect. So today we're going to examine how we think, feel, and behave with money as it comes to a government shutdown. Now, we've already been in the government shutdown more than 30 days by the time you hear this recording. But also we understand that by the time you hear this recording, it could also be over, and that's what we hope for. However, don't turn that dial if you're not impacted by a government shutdown, because whatever the case, I wanted to make this episode timeless. So no matter what the financial crisis you're facing, whatever is discussed today will continue to help. So you can also listen to Season 4, Episode 11 for further refining when navigating financial uncertainty. But today, I'm going to break down for you what we can avoid and what we can pursue in a financial crisis. I'll also provide some links to articles that were written during the shutdown if you're just curious, but you'll notice that I sound like a broken record because these are tried and true measures during financial crisis. So the first thing to avoid is making the situation worse, like overlapping zero or low interest loans that create repayment chaos. I'm going to be talking about Army Emergency Relief, the Army's official charity, and some folks may have used both that type of interest-free loan and maybe their bank's interest-free loan, but we want to stay away from that. Today, I also have a special guest that I will introduce a little bit later, but it is in line with this next step of when we are feeling frightened, hurt, and overwhelmed in the waiting. And I can't wait to introduce this guest. So again, stay tuned, don't touch that dial. So there's a famous Stoic Greek philosopher by the name of Lucius Annius Seneca who said, "We are more often frightened than hurt. And we suffer more from imagination than from reality." And this philosopher is simply shedding light on the human tendency to catastrophize, creating unnecessary suffering for ourselves. So again, when I say let's avoid making the situation worse, that's exactly what I'm saying. And there's actually brain imaging within mindfulness research that provides evidence that when we act mindfully rather than mindlessly, we activate the right prefrontal cortex, which, if you didn't know, is the CEO of your brain. And it's your reasonable mind. It also decreases the amygdala response. The amygdala is the fear center of your brain, which could also be reframed as your emotion mind. And mindfulness also activates memory and learning centers. It helps us recall all the wonderful things that we've already learned about finances and how to respond, what to do, and we could call that our wise mind. Mindfulness also offsets cortical thinning. And if you guys have ever heard that you're losing brain cells, that is a reality. So this cortical thinning, where you're decreasing in neurons in your prefrontal cortex, mindfulness stops that or offsets that cortical thinning. So it is effective. And mindfulness can help us to avoid making things worse. So, next thing to avoid is only doing what's easy. It wouldn't be a financial crisis if it were easy. We wouldn't call it a crisis if it were easy. And I'll address more of what's hard in a moment. But after you actually do it, you'll coincidentally look at it later as, oh, that was easy. So here's a good quote by Vince Lombardi, a famous football coach. "Anything worthwhile in life takes a commitment." And this means not just putting everything on credit. So that would be the easy way out, right? Using credit, we want to do that as a last resort. But if it is unavoidable, limit to essential purchases and plan for a rapid repayment. Here's another thing to avoid. Avoid mental or emotional math. You hear me talk about mental math all the time, and that's simply when you haven't written it down, you haven't supplied yourself with the true numbers, but there's also emotional math. This leads to fear-based decisions because true numbers steeped in reality are not right in front of you. You're attempting to operate from your amygdala, that fear center of your brain, rather than the prefrontal cortex or the CEO or reasonable mind, that portion of your brain. Another thing that we tend to do with emotional math is tapping into long-term retirement to pay down short-term unsecured debt. I can guarantee you your future self will be very disappointed. Another thing to avoid, non-essential spending or support. This is finally your opportunity to identify the spending leaks, such as subscriptions, takeout, designer makeup, supporting family members who could support themselves. I know I'm stepping on toes. But again, don't turn the dial just yet. We're going to talk about the things you can pursue in just a moment. So when it comes to avoiding non-essential spending, let's get back to basics. If it doesn't pass the necessary food, shelter, and survival sniff test, it doesn't go in the cart. Simply put, I have a story about my daughter. I was putting things together in my online shopping cart for my grocery delivery, and we had already had the conversation about what is necessary, and my 12-year-old snuck some Poppy into the cart. Poppy is one of those prebiotic drinks, no Army endorsement implied, and usually they're about $2 per can. And so she wanted $22 worth of Coke for just $12. So we had to have a little conversation. That's definitely non-essential spending. So obviously it did not go in the cart. But here comes her guardian, who dropped off, after I told her the story, dropped off a case on our front porch. They are not affected by the government shutdown at this time. Here's another thing to avoid. Avoid only seeking education and not professional advising. I love that you listen to these podcasts. I love that you attend the sci-fi classes, and I love that you'll call me for education, but that's the only thing I can provide. I cannot provide advising. You could even attend the TSP webinars and the federal employment, federal retirement webinars, but even they cannot provide you professional advising. Sometimes that is what you need to understand the tax implications or other long-term implications of whatever you're planning to do during a financial crisis. A lot of folks think that it is appropriate to take out a TSP loan to pay off one debt, so that's one less thing they need to worry about. But you could have a hefty tax bill if you're not careful. So you definitely want to seek advice in those situations as well. Another thing to avoid, you'll need a professional sounding board in times of crisis. Avoid the coworker in the cubicle next to you whose hair is also on fire. That kind of advice may not be appropriate for you. So here's what I want you to think about in terms of what you can pursue during a financial crisis. First thing is to pursue organization, creating that survival budget. Normally, I don't like the B word, but hard times call for hard language. Budget implies restriction, but in a financial crisis, that's what needs to happen, restriction. This is where you identify your true numbers that are steeped in reality. And this is where you can prioritize your expenses. It doesn't make sense to keep maximizing your retirement contributions when you can't pay your rent. As stated earlier, if it doesn't pass the necessary food, shelter, and survival sniff test, it doesn't go in the cart. Another thing to pursue, communication. This includes calling your creditors, your lenders, your banks, and a lot of times this activity seems hard because it does take a lot of time out of the day. But a lot of people report back to me later, Olivia, this actually really wasn't that hard. And I got more out of this conversation than I thought I ever would. I even called my bank to make sure, hey, If this is ongoing and my husband doesn't receive his paycheck here, what are the implications? Even if we have, and you see right in front of you that we have a certificate of deposit, but we don't want to touch that yet, are we still eligible for a 0% payday loan? And you would be surprised all the other things that they were offering and saying, and it just made me feel so much better. So yeah, you have to go through the phone trees. You have to go through the anxiety of finally getting to talk to a real person. But by the time you get to that person, the anxiety starts to wane. So make sure that you are pursuing communication with your family as well, and that you're laying out all the expectations. When you're calling these creditors, these lenders, and these banks, ask about the hardship options, the fee waivers, deferrals, revised payment plans, extended grace periods, a due date change. If you didn't know about all of these terms, look them up. They're quite surprising and can be very beneficial without having to take out a loan at all. But these folks will not know anything unless you tell them. And make sure that you're documenting any new terms of agreement. And it's the same with servicers. Your utilities, your cell phone providers. This is how you can also understand how much you actually need to pay monthly until this financial crisis is no longer a financial crisis. And then you need to pursue action. Now that you know what you'll need to be paying out every month to stay out of a financial pickle, start acquiring the cash or resources to get you there. Many folks, when they go through this process, find that they don't need their full net pay after they've prioritized expenses and renegotiated terms with creditors, lenders, and banks. You could also use yourself as a resource of pursuing action, using the emergency savings that you've set aside, cashing in assets through yard sales or online marketplaces, perhaps acquiring a second job that is both ethical and mission approved. And also you can use your local resources. Lots of food banks that have come out in at least our local community and doing wonderful things for furloughed employees, but they're there all the time, not just during your individual financial crisis or in a government shutdown, but you'll find them there in all of your financial crises. And then, of course, you can also pursue charitable organizations. And I'll talk about Army Emergency Relief just for a moment. I happen to be an Army Emergency Relief officer, and one of the things that they have put out during the shutdown is the Government Shutdown Relief Loan. That is available to active duty members, which includes reservists and Guard members that are on Title 10 orders over 30 days, including AGR. So if you fall in that eligible category, they can match your end of month or your initial biweekly payment if you need it for that pay period. So that is something that you can also pursue. It will require commander approval, but it is a very easy process that you can apply for online. It is only available online, and that link will be provided in the post below in this podcast as well. So not only is Army Emergency Relief available, but maybe you're also sister service branch members, such as the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines. There are other charitable organizations that fit those branches of service as well. And then before I introduce our special guests, here's one last thing to pursue. That is protection. Scammers will always find an opportunity during a crisis situation. So make sure that you're visiting the Federal Trade Commission and the FBI's websites to stay up to date with the soup du jour of scams. Monitor your financial reputation by reviewing your credit report at least 2 times a year. And then also pursuing change. Plan to do something different when the crisis ends, including a reward for yourself. Set a timeline for restoring savings, resuming auto payments, and resuming retirement contributions. And if you don't have an emergency savings this time around, do your future self a favor and harness that anxiety you felt this time around to propel you towards savings. I do this all the time with my girls. If they have come home and they've told me they never want to do something again, I simply ask them in the moment to capture it in a video. And I would encourage you to do the same. So you can, in that video, tell yourself and remind your future self exactly what you were experiencing in this moment. I did not like how I felt not having emergency savings set aside. I felt this way. I experienced these physiological responses. I experienced these emotional responses or psychological responses. My relationship suffered as a result, or whatever the case. You can record that so that when you are finding it difficult to do the things that you know you must do, you can simply replay that to yourself to remind yourself of the suffering that you want to avoid in the future. So, for example, when my daughter absolutely hated a particular summer camp, I got her on video as a 5-year-old, and sure enough, human behavior, next year came around. She wanted to go back to the same summer camp. I replayed for her that precious video where she was crying and said she never wanted to go back. It was way too hot. They didn't even do the cheers and gymnastics that she dreamed about. And so that helped her make her decision to decrease future suffering. So, all jokes and fun aside, as I prepared for this podcast, I realized something was missing. I've had several professional guests over the years, including social workers, a nutritionist, an attorney, and other specialists, but I've never had a chaplain. When we have addressed the matters of the mind and the body and still feel a void, perhaps it's time to pursue matters of the soul. We are three-dimensional beings, and it seems like the thing that continuously trips up people is the waiting. So with me today, I have Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Vidrine with me. Thank you for being here, sir. We know you as our garrison chaplain. And my question for you today is, why is the waiting so hard?
Well, Olivia, the waiting's hard because it's something that we can't control. And anytime we can't control something, it creates frustration. And we're not used to operating that way. We're used to being in charge, and we're used to not having to worry on someone else or something else, because we like to control this. And right now we're in a time where we have to trust. And so as I speak to you, I speak from a Christian perspective. My background is I'm a Southern Baptist ordained and endorsed Army chaplain. So I speak from that perspective. And as we've been sitting here talking, it brought me back to some times when I had to trust God. And so, having experienced what I've preached, it reminded me of the days when I was in Bible college. When I got out to go to Bible college off of active duty in 2001. So I was in from 1989 till 2001, got out to go to Bible college, and my GI Bill had not kicked in yet. So we weren't, me and my wife, we had 3 kids. We were short about $1,200 a month that we were expecting and counting on. It was completely out of my control. There were times where we had nothing at all to eat. And I remember praying and saying, Lord, you called me to be a minister, to get out and trust you and follow you. And here I am, and I can't take care of my family. I can't provide for them. And I remember praying for God to bring in groceries. I prayed for gas. I prayed for specific dollar amounts. And I can tell you, every one of those prayers got answered. I remember sitting around a bowl of popcorn with my wife and 3 kids, because that's the last thing we had. And I had been praying that God would provide. And I remember sitting there, and I remember giving thanks for that bowl of popcorn. And then as soon as I said amen, I heard a door knock. and it was from some friends from Bible college. And we hadn't put out or despaired or said, hey, pray for us. We're broke. Wink, wink, And this friend, he said, Kirby, I was just sitting around on my couch, and we made some extra money this month. And the Lord just laid it on my heart to go out and buy y'all some groceries. And he said, I don't know if y'all even need it, but I've got like $200 worth of groceries. Now that was 2001, so that was a lot of groceries. And I remember just my knees kind of buckling because he answered the prayer, but he waited till there was nothing left, and then he answered the prayer. It's very uncomfortable to live like that, but when you learn how to trust God, when the times come again, he brings those things to your remembrance. So when I say that, I can say I've also experienced it. And that's just one incident, but there's been several times.
That's such a good take on that, because you said the waiting can be hard in these times of financial crisis because, number one, you can't fully control the situation.
Right.
And number two, it's uncomfortable. And so from a therapist perspective, and I'm definitely not a minister, but I'm hoping that some of the things that I provide can be therapeutic and minister to hearts. But psychologically speaking, this brings me to the thought of distress tolerance. A lot of us have not practiced tolerating distress.
Yeah.
Imagine our day-to-day being in traffic. We can't even tolerate the distress of being at a red light for an additional 30 seconds.
Right.
Let alone go through a financial crisis that has already lasted over 30 days. So if we haven't learned to build our distress tolerance muscle before a financial crisis, it's going to be really hard during that crisis. And actually, just shameless plug, be sure to listen to season 3, episode 8, where I do have a co-therapist there talking about distress tolerance. But instead of tolerating the discomfort, as you say, we want a quick fix.
Yeah.
We want to get back to the comfort. We want to get back to the known. And I'm sure that as you and your wife are enjoying that bowl of popcorn, right? The kids are probably like, gosh, this is the greatest thing in the world. I can't believe we get to have popcorn for dinner. They have no mental awareness of the dire straits that you might be in, right? No worries, no cares. They're loving it. And during this crisis, there are beautiful things that are happening, but in many ways, those are not revealed until later when there's more clarity and the fog has lifted. But you also mentioned gratitude being kind of a buffer. Epictetus, who is also a Stoic Greek philosopher, who was born into slavery, and even when he was freed, he lived out the remainder of his life ill and unable to walk. He said this: he is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for that which he has.
Yes.
And you said grace over that bowl of popcorn.
Yep. Thankful for that popcorn.
And you voiced your gratefulness over that popcorn. And then there was a knock on the door.
Yeah. Yeah, it was probably one of the most faith-strengthening things I've ever experienced. You know, you read stories of missionaries and people in foreign fields who pray food in and pray finances in, and they walk by faith and they trust God constantly. And I had never experienced that. Everything was cognitive. But until I experienced it, wow, what that did to my faith. And like you said, that, you know, building those, what would you called it, muscles?
Distress tolerance.
Distress
muscle.
tolerance, yes. Yes, that's, you know, we also talk about resiliency, and, you know, you don't become resilient by never going through anything hard. You become resilient by going through hard things.
Right.
And that's kind of the same line, I think. But it's not fun. So nobody's going to say it is.
No. And in this time, and I feel like I can confess because I have a chaplain here in my midst. If I could confess to you and confess to all the listeners, I had myself a brief pity party one night, cried myself to sleep. It wasn't just about the shutdown. I mean, there were some other things happening within the family system, that were upsetting. And, just all the combined cumulative stressors, and all about that as also Chaplain Vidrine is also a licensed marriage and family therapist. You know all about that. But in the midst of all of this, we go through these things and we have those pity parties. But then I started thinking of Viktor Frankl. I quote him left and right in my classes all the time. And then it dawned on me, okay, yeah, I have to go to work and I have to go to work without pay, but I get to serve other people. I get to make a service member's life just a little easier if I process that Army emergency relief case. I get to serve a DOD or federal civilian and help them find some local resources just to make their lives a little bit better. And in the process of providing those resources, I also learn of the resources that I could use for myself if we had to use them. And so I'll share it with this then. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he found that when he was sitting imprisoned in the Nazi internment camp, that it was when he started to redirect his focus and de-reflect. So instead of being focused on self, he started focusing on others. And that's where he found meaning and purpose. And I love this quote. If there is meaning in life at all, then there must be meaning in suffering.
Yes. And there is. Think about Joseph in Genesis chapter 37 through 50. He was hated by his brothers. He was sold into slavery. He was accused falsely by Potiphar's wife, and he was imprisoned. But he ended up being the prime minister of Egypt. And in chapter 50, he says to his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good to bring about the salvation of many people. So we never know why we go through the suffering. And, we don't have to understand necessarily the Bible, but it's important to just believe it sometimes. And when we understand that God's providence is taking place in our lives, it can give us peace and comfort because we know that all those things work together for good.
Right. And on a secular level, another Viktor Frankl quote, but there was no need to be ashamed of tears, just like Joseph.
Yeah.
For tears bore witness that a man had the greatest of courage, the courage to suffer.
That's right. Yep. Yes. A lot of people don't like suffering. No. I don't like suffering. No one likes to suffer. Right. But when you do go through suffering and you see the benefit that comes from it, man, for me, it makes me praise God even more. And I'm thankful that I went through or experienced that.
Right. And as folks, and again, as folks listen to this podcast, we would hope that the shutdown has been resolved before this even airs. But again, we want to make this timeless, and it may not even be a financial crisis related to a government shutdown, but any financial crisis. And I know that I've referred folks to you and the type of folks that I generally see, and several different financial crises abound, such as divorce, loss of job, loss of life, grieving the loss of a loved one so much to where they start losing pay because it's too difficult to return to work. Yeah. They're in a leave without pay status, or several different things that could be happening. A spouse loses a job for whatever reason, but illness, sickness also comes into play. And this all has one thing in common, and that is suffering. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't help that we don't know the end date. As you were sitting on the couch with your family with that bowl of popcorn, you did not know when you were making that popcorn that within 30 minutes we're going to have the thing that is going to fill our bellies and fill our souls.
Yeah.
You didn't know that. And so part of that, you mentioned a lot of us want to go for why. And that is also why the waiting is hard. Mm-hmm. Why is this even happening to me? Did I do something wrong?
Right.
Is this a punishment of some sort? But again, back to my friend, Viktor Frankl, he says, those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how.
Yeah.
And that's what you do with folks. That's what I do with folks. Even in the midst of this struggle, even if we don't know why, we can find and bear the how to move through it.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Well, while you're talking, it made me think of the word hope. Mm. To say why is human, and there's nothing wrong, and God doesn't get angry at us if we say why God. But when your faith and your trust is completely 100% in Him. In other words, you're not just sitting in the chair with your feet on the ground. You're sitting in the chair with your feet off of the ground. You're 100% trusting Him. You're in the safest place you can be. And that's how I feel. Mm. And that's how I've learned. It's not something that, you just wake up with all this faith. No, you go through trials to learn these things, and you experience these things, and God proves Himself as you experience these things. So don't be afraid of it. Doesn't mean you have to enjoy it.
Right.
But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And when you come out, you'll be able to look back, you'll just be able to praise God for His sustaining hand, His providential hand, and how He took care of you. And your faith will never be weaker again. It'll always be stronger.
But Chaplain, that can be so difficult for folks because in the midst of suffering, there's so much darkness.
Yep.
And I like how you use the term safety. There's safety. And again, talking about matters of the soul, what that faith is.
Right.
What that faith looks like, what it feels like. And I even heard someone say recently, we don't have to feel peace. We can claim peace.
That's right. God's promises.
To feel faith. We can claim faith and then follow through with those actions. But in the darkness, there is a fear that tends to grip folks. And in that darkness, in that fear, there's this paralyzation where they don't make that forward movement. And so you're talking about light now.
Right.
So seeking that light, what would someone do to even move in that direction?
Well, there's only one, I believe there's only one light. And that light is the person of Jesus Christ. And so if you're in a dark place, that's where I would go. Now, as a Christian, we also experience depression and sadness and grief and heaviness, but we don't sorrow like people who have no hope. And so, when you're in those moments, that would be my strongest suggestion. It's what I do. It's what my wife does. It's what we encourage our kids to do, is to pursue light. And I get that from reading God's Word. As we were sitting here before we started, I was going through Romans chapter 8 and talking about those things that work together for good. And then also in Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 to the end, talking about anxiety. And he's telling us not to, worry about tomorrow, because he's got all those things. If he takes care of the flowers of the field and he takes care of the birds of the air, why would he not take care of us, who he loves even more than those things? So that's what Kirby does. That's what I do to stay out of the darkness. And also, would I feed myself spiritually, my mind? What do I listen to? I like to listen to K-Love on the way home from work to sometimes forget about work and, positive, encouraging.
K-Love.
Yeah. So, it's all those things that you feed yourself. What do you feed yourself spiritually? That would be, some people, maybe you don't feed yourself anything spiritually. I'd be concerned about that.
Yeah, and we might have some listeners who may not have any kind of beliefs whatsoever, but we're still going to attend to matters of the soul regardless.
Right.
And I remember when I went through crisis response training as a therapist, one of the things, and I wish, it's on the tip of my tongue, I can't remember who said this, but someone told this person, whenever there's darkness, look for the light. And one way to do that is look for helpers.
Yes.
Who are the helpers in our midst? And a lot of times that is our light. What are those resources that are available? And that light attracts, right? So what can you look for that will attract you and move you towards the hope and expectation that will sustain you during this financial crisis? So that could be a food bank. It could be a local church or even a non-religious community event where they are providing resources for folks as well. But again, another quote from my friend, Viktor Frankl. Of course, I wish he were my friend. I wish I would have had the chance to meet him, but his writings have been very soothing to my soul over the years. He said, "What is to give light must endure burning." So even those of us who give information, even those of us who share and are acting as a light to other folks, we're also going through a difficult situation.
Right.
You're furloughed. I'm furloughed. We're sitting here today not knowing whether we're going to be paid. But that's okay. I see the smile on your face. You see the smile on my face. There's still something that is going to be beneficial here that we know. And for my avid readers out there, I'll share another fun quote on light. And this is from J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. If you're familiar with Professor Dumbledore, he said, "Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if only one remembers to turn on the light."
Yeah.
So how do we do that, Chaplain? How do we turn the light on for ourselves? How do we turn the light on for other people?
Well, you could be a positive thinker or a negative thinker. I think gratitude, we talked about that earlier, looking at the things that we can be thankful for. I think there's a lot of blessings in our life that we ignore, that we take for granted, that we get to enjoy every day, and we never consider to be thankful for those things. So we should be hunting that. That's one way. And again, feeding those things that are pure and lovely and good in your life. Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I like that.
Be a positive thinker.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I'm so glad that I had you on. Thank you so much for carving time out of your day. I'm hoping that the listeners got something out of this, because again, as I went through my notes and I was thinking about what I was going to provide today, I felt like a broken record, and my listeners have heard this already. They're going to read it in articles. They're going to see the same thing presented over and over again. But what was missing was the matter of the soul. You see that with your clients. I've seen that with my clients. But I will leave everyone with, guess what? Another Viktor Frankl quote. Yeah. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. So in the waiting, whatever financial crisis it might be, what is one thing that you can do differently? Thanks for listening. If you found this helpful, please remember to rate us and review us wherever you listen.